Ganon presents, and has historically presented for several games now, a unique complication in our ordinary understanding of good and bad characters, and to that, a unique challenge to the common understanding that tier lists are just expressions of who's good or bad, whatever that may mean. Ganon introduces a question that we have a hard time answering without at least at face value contradicting some of our professed opinions. Everyone agrees he's terrible, but yet everyone's terrified of buffing him, and he's among the least cited characters to receive buffs. Statistically, we know that he's the worst in the game, having ample data to show that he was, pre-pandemic, the worst performing character in the game at high levels, in spite of a massive talent pool representing him pretty regularly. So, why does everyone balk at the idea of buffing him? This cognitive dissonance is the result of not recognizing in what sense we use the term bad. For starters, we need to delineate between the concepts of individual instances of something and long-term patterns that build up from those individual instances, like landing a Ganon forward smash at any given moment versus the long-term statistical pattern of Ganon actually landing forward smashes, which is very low, by the way. When we refer to characters as bad, we're usually referencing the tier list, but what does the tier list represent exactly? It represents a character's long-term patterns of success and long-term performance potential. To use the earlier Ganon forward smash example, the tier list wouldn't assert that Ganon is good because he might kill you in one shot with forward smash, rather it would assert that Ganon is bad because forward smash is too unlikely to hit to play a significant role in his long-term success, even if it is tremendously good when forward smash does happen to work out. The so-called Ganon paradox is the cognitive dissonance that results from our lived experience that, yeah, Ganon is actually a lot scarier and likelier to cause an upset than a lot of other characters, which contradicts the common wisdom that he's one of, if not the worst in the game. It comes from trying to square the long-term or tier list sense of the word bad with the short-term, I just lost a set because Ganon just fucking nuked me at 40 experience without recognizing that immediate experience and long-term viability apply to different scales. But if we recognize what tier lists actually represent, and by extension how statistics play a role in a character's viability, then that cognitive dissonance should go away. So, good and bad can coexist provided you apply those labels at the appropriate scales. Ganon actually is pretty good at a granular short-term level because any given interaction may overwhelmingly favor him. But at a more coarse-grained long-term level, he's bad because over a long stretch of time, interactions are unlikely to favor him, much less consistently. This phenomenon of contradictory qualities coexisting at different scales isn't even unique to Smash either, but is in fact a fundamental feature of physical reality itself. For a little background, at the turn of the 20th century, physicists were a little baffled to find that electrons exhibited truly random behavior, and in an attempt to better understand this behavior, they devised a series of experiments, among which what's now famous as the double slit experiment, which, without getting too detailed, showed that though any single electron they fired ended up at a completely random spot, over time a predictable pattern still emerged. Point being, long-term order emerged from short-term chaos. When we apply labels to something like good or bad, the labels don't always make sense unless we define the scope to which we're applying them. Likewise, this weirdly expresses Ganon's dynamic, in that any given Ganon electron might be a win for him, like landing a nuke on someone, but the overall pattern is going to be a big L, for the same reason winning the lottery on your second try doesn't make the odds of winning the lottery any less shitty. This translates to our lived experience in terms of our bias towards immediate experience over long-term patterns. For instance, if we get rocked by a Ganon, we're tempted to mistakenly extend that short-term experience to claims about his tier list position, i.e., a Ganon scared me in a set, I don't want him to get any scarier. This is presumably why a lot of people don't want him buffed, because they fear scarier short-term interactions over long-term consistency, in spite of the fact that it's the latter that makes a character good in the tier list sense. To visualize the difference between excelling in either the short or long term and why they're important, compare Ganon to, let's say, Peach. If you give Ganon a mile, he takes a light year. If you give Peach an inch, she takes a mile. This is important because smaller intervals of error present themselves at high levels of play, so characters that can act upon smaller mistakes more consistently will be long-term good, while characters that can only act upon larger mistakes will be long-term bad. And though Ganon is the subject here, this whole phenomenon isn't unique to just Ganon, rather he just so happens to be the preeminent example of extreme ends of the short and long-term dynamics. It isn't as pronounced with other characters because most of our experiences with the other characters in the short term line up perfectly well with their tier list position, which is why probably no one finds the idea of buffing Kirby all that offensive in spite of him being better than Ganon in the tier list sense. In a word, no character embodies the simultaneous qualities of being least likely to beat you consistently, but also most likely to beat you at least once and cause an upset to the degree that Ganon does. For some visuals, take a look at this chart. Every character in the game can be placed into one out of 3 of these quadrants, with the balance of the game thankfully being at least good enough that no poor soul is unlucky enough to end up in the bottom left quadrant. Ganon, I'd argue, is one of the few characters that occupies the upper left quadrant, meaning he has extreme highs marred by equally extreme lows and inconsistency, while top tiers generally occupy the upper right, and more balanced characters tend towards the middle. Bowser, for instance, doesn't have this disconnect between his short and long-term performance potential. He has fairly rewarding interactions that are also fairly consistent, so it's plain he's good, and you're not going to get all these conflicting signals that Bowser is simultaneously great and awful. Belmonts don't have that disconnect either because their dynamics are fairly moderate highs and lows with moderate consistency. Ganon, on the other hand, gives mixed signals. That these two separate scales exist, short-term greatness coupled with long-term badness as a result of bad statistical averages, explains this never-ending roller coaster of emotion between please God don't buff Ganon and Ganon is trash, with either opinion depending on how recently you almost lost to a Ganon, but that we don't often recognize that the two distinct dynamics are at play rather than one causes confusion about the nature of the character. Anyway, that's all I had to say on the topic, guys, and hopefully you found it to be at least sort of interesting. If you didn't learn anything, I hope I at least didn't make you unlearn anything, at least not anything useful. Hi guys, thank you for watching another one of my videos. I really appreciate it. So, as usual, in addition to thanking everyone for just watching the video, I would also like to thank a very special group of people, namely those who think my videos are of a high enough quality that they elect to pay me to make them, namely these fine people right here. So, if you envy those among this list and would like your name to be among them next video, I will include a link to my Patreon in the description below, and I generally do try to make being a patron or whatever fairly worthwhile for the people that sign up, namely copies of songs I've recently written. That's the exciting one. I know that's the one everyone's coming here for. But the one everyone is probably more interested in, things like live VOD review on my stream and things like that. So you can read more about it on the Patreon if you are so inclined. So anyway, like I said, I will include a link down below. And that said, hopefully it won't be another 2 months before my next video. I've just been very busy with music stuff, so which is a good thing. But you know, it is what it is. So anyway, once again, thank you guys, and I will see you when I see you.